Critically acclaimed Mexican-American singer, songwriter, and musician Alejandro Escovedo truly crosses boundaries. From leading a punk band that opened for the Sex Pistols to his latest album, La Cruzada, a Spanish version of his 2018 album, The Crossing, the artist's incredible career spans many decades and diverse musical genres. Joining me to discuss his esteemed body of work and how his family's own immigration background has shaped his life and his music is Alejandro Escovedo. Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate you joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So La Cruzada, it was released on October 24th and reached number 8 on the Billboard Latin Pop album chart that same exact week. So it opened at number 8. Congratulations. Let's start by listening to some of the song Pasos de los Sombros, Footsteps in the Shadows.
Hey, hey, ven acá, te necesito más que nunca. Hey, hey, ven acá, corriendo por nuestras vidas. Hey, hey, ven acá, hay refugio en tus palpitos. Se están acercando, nos están encerrando.
Wow, that is really, really amazing. And you recorded it both in Spanish and in English. Do you mind if we listen to the English version too?
Feel free.
Hey, hey, come on, I need you more than ever. Hey, hey, come on, we're running for our lives. Hey, hey, come on, there's refuge in your heartbeat. They're closing in, they're closing in.
So what is La Cruzada, The Crossing, about?
Well, in about 2016, I began to tour Europe more than I had in the past, and especially Italy. And when I was given an opportunity to tour Europe, I was given the choice of working with different bands from Europe. And one of the bands was an Italian band from a little village in Emilia-Romagna by the name of Modigliana. And the band was called Don Antonio. And I fell in love with them. They're kind of soundtracky, abstract, very spacious music that I love very much. So my wife and I flew over there. We did a tour. It was 42 shows in 46 days, 10 different European countries, you know. Wow. So we got very close immediately, you know. And needless to say, we traveled by a van. So there was 5 Italians and my wife and I in the van with our equipment. So we were very cozy. And I went back 2 months later to tour southern Italy in Calabria. And it was there that I saw a real correlation, a real relationship between Mexican culture and Italian culture, especially in the South. There was a lot of immigrants coming from Africa and such countries. So they were having problems with that, dealing with that. And in my head, I devised this story of a young Italian boy, and his name is Salvo, and a young Mexican boy from Saltillo in the state of Coahuila, which is where my father's birthplace is. And his name is Diego. And they meet in Galveston, Texas while they're working at a restaurant. And it's while they're working in the kitchen that they devise this plan and kind of quest to go find the rock and roll that they'd read about and listened to all their lives. They love American punk rock music. They love the films of the 70s, the directors of the film, like Peckinpah and John Huston and different directors from the 70s. And they also love the Stooges, you know, and the Velvet Underground and such, you know, and they love the poetry of Bukowski and the Beat Poets. So that's the America that they go looking for.
Are these the things you love too, though?
Yes, very much. We immersed ourselves in these characters, both Antonio and I. Uh-huh. And, you know, they go looking for this America, and what they find is an America that's very closed to their ideas of freedom, their ideas to move freely throughout the United States and travel. They find a lot of different roadblocks along the way. In fact, at one point, Salvo is shot by a policeman, and we lose Salvo. And in the end, Diego makes it to LA to see the bands that he loves, but on his way back, he's still kind of fighting and being chased by immigration. And it's at the end of this journey with Diego that he kind of sits there and really kind of contemplates whether this journey was worth it at all, really. And he decides that it's best that he goes back home.
Have you done albums like this in the past, like a whole concept of a story and a story arc?
I wrote an album with Chuck Prophet, and we wrote an album that was called Real Animal. And it's basically about my life in music. You know, how I started in punk rock and the bands I was in, the Nuns, opening up for the last Sex Pistols show, moving to New York and living in the Chelsea Hotel when Sid and Nancy lived there. And it was the tail end of that great New York scene. So, yeah, I have done that before.
How do you put this all together? Because basically writing a musical, in a way, a rock musical, right?
Very much, yes. You know, like when I wrote Real Animal with Chuck, we actually set up a storyboard, like we were making a film, you know. And so we had narrative for the different characters and the music and in the story, timelines and things like that. With this one, what we did was we traveled around the back roads of Texas, really getting a feel for different stories from DACA kids and things like that, you know, and just people who lived in the backcountry and what their views were on immigration and such. We ate a lot of tacos and we had a lot of fun driving around in my truck. I'd say I wrote about 98% of the lyrics while we were in the studio in Italy. And I think that having that perspective of being away from the country and being away from any sort of influence whatsoever really kind of liberated my creative self. And they just flowed out. And it was really wonderful to have it because the musicians were so supportive. And they also kind of gave me their viewpoint on what America was to them and what it would be like to be seen through the eyes of an immigrant.
So you wrote this whole album about immigration. Your family has an immigration story too. What is that?
Well, my father was born in Mexico in Saltillo, Coahuila. He was born in 1907. My father crossed the border when he was 12 years old looking for his own parents who had left him behind in Saltillo to be raised by his grandparents. So he made his way to San Antonio when he was 12. We had relatives in San Antonio, and these relatives told him that his parents were in a little town called Luling, Texas, where they were picking watermelons. And he was reunited with his mother and father and his sister, but found that his father was a very abusive man. And my father ran away again at the age of 16 and then began his family out on the West Coast, out in a place called Pittsburgh, California. My father ended up having 13 children, 8 of which became professional musicians. And it was really important to tell my father's story because I felt that my father had contributed a lot to American culture by raising this family that was musical and set out upon the world to spread nothing but love and music and peace, you know.
You know, it's amazing that you say that 8 of your father's children are musicians. Coke and Pete, they were part of Santana. They were part of that amazing band, your brothers. Javier started the Zeros, of extraordinarily influential punk rock band. Another brother, Mario, he was in a great band called the Dragons. And then it goes even beyond that. Your niece is Sheila E.
Yeah, it goes beyond that.
Also very, very popular pop artist. Now, several songs on the album deal directly with the present-day controversy over American immigration. How much of this album was political for you, and how much was just telling a story?
It doesn't play into politics, but politics certainly has to embrace the story because the story is an American story. In fact, one of the characters in The Crossing says, "I'm not the wetback here. You're the ones who crossed the ocean in order to come and kind of invade my country." But I think we wanted it to be so much a human story because we felt it would be more universal in that sense, rather than it being a political barb at any one particular thing, you know.
Let's hear a piece from another song off the album, Texas Is My Mother.
I would carry you on my shoulders across the muddy river. Texas feels like Mexico. She reminds me of my mother.
Beautiful. So what inspired the story in this song?
This song was actually inspired by some kids that we had met in Dallas who told us their story of crossing the border. And this young man, Javier, who was a wonderful clothes designer, very artistic, very creative, told me a story how he and his sister and his family crossed the border. And they crossed the river. And at one point, his aunt was very, very weak and she was feeling sick. And so he tried to carry her across the border, but the current was stronger than he was and took her away. And she died. And saying that Texas is my mother, I think what I was trying to say, that my father told me that when he crossed the border in those days, we're talking about, 1920, 1921, the border was like an invisible line, because Texas was Mexico at one point, as well as a good portion of the Southwest. When we live here, we always refer to Texas as occupied Mexico, because it's very Mexican and the culture is still very prevalent here. And it reminds me of my mother, who was born in San Marcos, Texas.
The spoken word Rio Navidad, it's very powerful. Let's hear some of Rio Navidad.
A retired Texas Ranger sits down next to me and says, "What's your name?" So I tell him, "My name's Diego." "What kind of wetback name is that?" he asks.
In this piece, Diego is confronted at a wedding by a Texas Ranger who calls him a racial slur. What inspired that song?
An actual experience that I had with an ex-Texas Ranger at my friend's wedding. I was in the True Believers at the time, so it was in the 80s. And my friend had a wedding down on the border around Piedras Negras and down in that area. And so we went to the wedding and it was all beautiful. At one point, we walked out into a field, I remember, and his uncle was out there smoking. And when we walked up to him, this gentleman said, "Uncle John, this is Alejandro." And the gentleman said, "What kind of wetback name is that?" And being that it was my friend's uncle, I couldn't really retaliate in any way. So I waited this long in order to kind of respond to it, with this song.
It hurts when you hear those things?
It always hurts. I mean, I think growing up a Chicano in Southern California, where we moved when I was young, there was always a sense that we didn't belong. And now more than ever, I realize at this point in my life, with the kind of politics that we have in this country and the division we have in this country, that we still don't belong,
Is that what makes you want to write these stories about immigrants who are coming to America?
It's a good way for me to express anger and frustration and a sense that I am as good as anyone, and to prove myself in a way that establishes my abilities and creativity, All my life in schools, when I was growing up, I was told that I couldn't be certain things. We were always kind of channeled to be laborers, basically, When I told my teacher I wanted to be a lawyer, they kind of laughed at me,
You formed the punk rock band, the Nuns, in San Francisco. You opened up for the Sex Pistols. What was it like being in San Francisco in the 1970s, I assume this is?
I had been living in Hollywood, California. So in Hollywood, I was not playing music, but I was following the bands religiously. And then my partner and I, Bobby, we hitchhiked to San Francisco. And it was there that we decided that we were going to make a movie about the world's worst band.
Right.
And since we couldn't play, we decided that we would be the band in the movie, And that band became the Nuns. And the Nuns went on to open for the last Sex Pistols show, amongst a lot of other things. We opened up for Brian Ferry at Winterland. We did a lot of great stuff. So being in San Francisco was really wonderful because I remember that, there was nowhere to play. Bill Graham owned the city, and so we would have to make up our own gigs, One time we walked into a Filipino supper club in North Beach called Mabuhay Gardens. And we told the owners that we could draw thousands of people, so they gave us like a Tuesday night or something, And we went out and we just gave these free tickets that we printed. And we gave them to everyone who looked cool, in North Beach. It was the City Lights bookstore people and the Cockettes and the Angels of Light and just all the bizarre and beautiful people that are in San Francisco, So we started to draw a lot of people, and that was our audience at first. And the Nuns really kind of was a launching pad. I got to see the world because of the Nuns,
When did you know that you were going to be successful? At what point in your career did that happen?
I don't think about that stuff that much. I can't think of anything else I'd ever want, in this world. I have a lovely life, So success for me, I mean, I did it, you know, I did it. I feel good about it.
And how do you feel in terms of your fans?
Well, I look at it like I was growing up with my fans, you know, because a lot of them came with me from punk rock and grew up, you know, and had kids, and now their kids come to the show. And I've even had some, you know, there's another generation that comes to the shows because of the records they find in their grandparents' or parents', you know, collection. Without those people, I wouldn't be here speaking to you today, you know.
Right. You went from San Francisco to, you know, with the Nuns, you made your way to New York City, I believe in the late 70s. You were actually living in the infamous Chelsea Hotel. You even wrote a song titled Chelsea Hotel. You want to share some stories of what it was like back in New York City as a musician in Chelsea, at the Chelsea Hotel?
For me, it was like a dream come true because, you know, a lot of kids of my generation wanted to go to Europe, you know, once they finished school or whatever, you know. And for me, it was always, I wanted to go to New York because the Velvet Underground were from there, and the Young Rascals, the New York Dolls, all these great bands, you know. So that's where I wanted to go. And when I got there, New York did not disappoint. It was an amazing, beautiful wonderland of concrete and steel and you know, just these buildings and people and cultures that I was never exposed to before. First night we went out with our managers. We went to Max's Kansas City to see Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers play. And at the table we were sitting at was Andy Warhol, Francesco Scavullo, who was a photographer for Interview magazine, George Clinton, Blondie, and the Nuns together watching the Heartbreakers, you know. Suddenly we felt part of something bigger, you know.
What made you leave New York to go to Austin?
I had hooked up with a couple guys from a band that I knew in San Francisco called the Dills. And we decided we were going to start a band that we had kind of toyed around with in San Francisco called Rank and File. And we were kind of really into roots music, listening to blues and country, you know, hard country and reggae, a lot of reggae, dub reggae especially, you know. And so we tried to start a kind of country-ish band in New York, but we couldn't find the right people. And when we toured through Austin, Texas. And I fell in love with it. And I remember calling my partner and saying, you know, if this doesn't work out with Rank and File, this might be a cool place to come and check it out, you know. And so we all decided we would move to Austin. It was 1980. And we moved to Austin. You know, Austin at that time was a city of songwriters. I mean, some of the greatest songwriters of all time, Townes Van Zandt, Joe Ely, Butch Hancock, Guy Clark. Willie was still hanging out here a lot, you know. So it was really the place to be to learn about that music. And when the band broke up, I just stayed. I love it here, you know.
Now, eventually you started a solo career in the late 90s, and you were actually called the Artist of the Decade by No Depression magazine. How'd that make you feel?
You know, it's wonderful, but it was kind of embarrassing. I remember all my friends calling me up and giving me a hard time about it, you know, like that I had just won haircut of the decade or whatever, you know, things like that. So it was a beautiful gift.
Now, what are you going to be working on next?
What I want to do is kind of collect about 15 songs throughout my career and translate them into Spanish and sing them in Spanish, you know. So I think I'll try that again and see how that goes. I think it's something I've always wanted to do anyway, so I think it'll be fun.
You're a Mexican-American born in America who has made a great success of himself as a musician. Did you reach your American dream? Is there still more to go?
I think there's a lot more to go, you know, because I think about the world that my father lived in, the world that my father tried to succeed in, the children that he raised, and how much success we've had with music. You know, it's been really beautiful. I want more for the people who are like my father. Every time I go to Mexico, all I see is my family, you know. Because of where I live in the Southwest, that's a vital part of my existence here. So my American dream, I feel like I've been very close to fulfilling, you know. But for a lot of other people, they don't have the kind of avenue or expression that I've had, you know. They're not able to find that voice. And so maybe through these songs, we can sing for them in a way, you know.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. It was really a pleasure talking with you and having you on our show.
You're quite welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. For more Brad Show Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.